Hi, my name is Nick Sakai. I'm an actor. I'm a proud member of SAG-AFTRA and also a National Co-Vice Chair of Asian Pacific American Media Committee at SAG-AFTRA. I'm one of the elected leaders of the union who has been volunteering our time to work for realistic and better representation of AAPI performers in English language media. And today, we are proud to present the special panel from AIFF called AAPI in Audio Drama. We'll be talking about what we, AAPI performers and creators, can do to support and encourage your own stories to be told in this emerging market. Panelists include our fellow SAG-AFTRA member, Emily Wu Zeller, writer Mate Dupont, playwright Nina Key, and writer and producer Roshan Singh. If you'd like to find out about what we, SAG-AFTRA, do in more details, you can visit our website at sagaftra.org. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to our moderator, Angela Ying from Realm Media Productions.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining the 45th Asian American International Film Festival. This is the panel AAPI in audio dramas. I also want to give a quick thank you to SAG-AFTRA, City, Lifewater, and Baksu for being this event's sponsor. My name is Angela Yee, and I'm the moderator for today's event. I am also the creator of the audio drama Residents of Persephone Park, a podcast focusing on mythological creatures and a story as crazy as the legends themselves. We are here today with Emily Wu Zeller. We also here today with Matsi Dappel.
Hello.
Nina Key. Yes, happy Satan! And last but not least, Roshan Singh.
Hello, hello.
So this panel is here to help anyone who's interested in audio dramas, whether you are a creator yourself or just a listener. And we hope you will get the information you're looking for here. The very first question is, of course, we'll go with Matsi. What was the inspiration for your series and why did you do an audio drama of all mediums?
There are two inspirations mainly. One is literally just another podcast called The Magnus Archives, which me and my best friend binged throughout when we were both unemployed and in the pandemic. So we love the horror aspect. We love the kind of anthology-esque aspect, but we wanted to make our own kind of spin on it. And that brings in the second inspiration, which is in a lot of horror movies, there's always this one person who comes in and they're usually a person of color and they're like a shaman or a magical person and they're like, oh, I know exactly how to fix this and this is how you do it. And then they just disappear and you're like, why didn't they like it's like a fire like the fire department coming in, it's like, this is how you stop a fire, and then they leave without stopping the fire. So I love like Filipino mythology, Filipino folklore, so I wanted to have a character who was that shaman, who was that person, deal with supernatural elements and be like, I know how to handle this. And yeah, there's an overarching story, but that was like the primary driving force for the main character and the idea of this podcast.
And what is your podcast called?
It's the Hainai podcast. Very creepy, very scary, according to people who have listened to it.
And then I also wanted to ask Roshan the same question, because I know Temujin started off as a play, I believe, right? So how was that transition, and why did you, like, I have a suspicion why you chose audio dramas, but can you explain why you chose to do audio drama instead?
Yeah. God, I would love to hear about your suspicion. So hello, I'm Roshan.
Called the pandemic.
Actually, so no, I get to give you the real reason. But yeah, hi, my name is Roshan. I am the creator of the podcast Temujin. Temujin is the story, a historical drama charting the rise of a young Genghis Khan, told from the perspective of his best friend turned mortal enemy.
Okay, and we are back. So sorry about that, guys. So Matsi, back to the question, what is the inspiration for your series and why as an audio drama?
So I have two inspirations for my series. One is an existing podcast called The Magnus Archives, which dealt with horror and a lot of really lo-fi stylings of horror, like tape recorders, etc. And we really enjoyed that. It had a really long story, but it also had like anthology elements. So I wanted to do that as well, and we wanted to make it into an audio drama, kind of because we were so inspired by the imagery that Magnus Archives had done. And the second thing is that in a lot of horror movies, there's always this one character who comes in, usually, if not always, a person of color, who knows exactly what to do and how to deal with this supernatural event, and then they just leave. And it's like there was a fire, and the fire department came in, told you what to do, and then left and did not put out the fire. And it never made sense to me. So I made my protagonist in my podcast, which is called the Hainai Podcast. She comes from a shaman family, and she knows how to deal with all these creepy, horrible, supernatural things to a certain degree. And because of my love of like Filipino culture, mythology, folklore, I wanted to incorporate that into the story. And so all that together, and I wanted to do something radio drama-esque because I thought it was just fun. At first I was like, oh, it just sounds fun, I'll just do it, it's fun. And then everyone started telling me it was creepy. A lot of my older relatives started telling me that it was just like the radio dramas they listened to when they were younger. And I was like, this is outrageously, like, this is beyond what we expected to do. We don't know anything about podcasting, and now we are fairly successful in terms of like reaching our audience. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, there's definitely been a run. It's interesting because audio dramas is such an old medium, but it's definitely resurfacing during the pandemic. Roshan, I'd like to ask the same question about your series. I know you wanted it to be a play at the beginning, but now it's an audio drama. So how did that transition work?
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. I would say the production inspiration for it was probably like I grew up listening to Peter and the Wolf on cassette tape, which for anyone else who is the one that goes like a do 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 do, and each animal in the story has its own little instrument, and they all play this melody. And I used to go to sleep every single night listening to that when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and that was like an early sense of like, hey, you can tell a pretty cool story using only like music and dialogue, and that was compounded with like listening to the BBC's Hitchhiker's Guide radio series,
Classic.
which was tremendous, including the new version with Dirk Maggs, which is also fantastic. And then I think all of that sort of culminated into the opportunity to do Temujin, which was a finished, as Angela pointed out, it was a finished sort of like play script. But when I was thinking about it, I'm from Singapore, born and raised, and I only moved to New York last year, so I had this fun little conundrum of like, I think a whole bunch of us had finished working on the story that we were really proud of, and we felt like, oh, we want the world to see this. But then I think there was this reckoning of like, okay, we stage this as a play, and we pour our heart out. 200 people see it if we're lucky. Times can be 4 nights, and we're just thinking, well, what avenues exist for us to pay everybody involved in an independent production, make sure as many people in the world saw it as possible, and sort of were able to stage it in such a way where there was no compromise. And we felt like, we could do all, and that sort of is the sell for audio dramas in terms of how I looked into that. It's like, I can't believe we were able to do all of those things. We could pay everybody involved, we could get it to a worldwide audience, and we could release it for free.
Mhm.
And I think that sort of was the appeal of audio dramas for Temujin. And that format. And then the pandemic happened, and it was kind of like, oh, well, good thing we decided on that course of action.
It's like you guys knew what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Worked out.
Nina, I also wanted to ask you, because you also are a playwright who started producing audio or writing audio dramas. Have you noticed a big difference between writing between the two mediums? And is there any things you think other writers should know about those differences? Oh, Nina, you're muted. Oh, see, we knew this would happen. We talked about this.
My dog started
I
playing
caught
with
you.
a squeaky toy over there, and so
Oh,
I muted
no.
it, and then I don't know. I should have just let him squeak. I don't know. Yeah, so I think there are definitely some really, now you can hear him do it. But whatever. There are definitely some really clear differences in terms of writing for audio drama and writing for stage plays. Your question was, what should new writers know about?
Well, yeah. What have you noticed? Like, what are the differences, and what do you think people should be aware of when they are writing an audio drama?
Yeah, so I started writing audio dramas when I got into a program, I guess you could call it, called the Radio Roots Writers Group with the Parsnip Ship. The Parsnip Ship does regular events, and they take plays and they have like an audience come and then they record it and then it's you can go to Spotify and listen to it. But they were interested in teaching a group of writers how to specifically write for audio. And I would say it's a very different process. One of the things that we like kind of got into, I know the squeaking is he's running off with it now in his mouth. It's never gonna stop. But yeah, that you're focusing on sound. There's so many special effects like world building that can really happen by creating soundscapes and things like that. I think there's a lot of differences. I won't go into like all like 101 differences that I've noticed. But when you were talking, Rashawn, about growing up listening to books on tape, I actually remembered just now that my mom used to put in these Korean, we had this huge like thing of like all these books and you could follow it along and then you could also listen to it on the tape. But I definitely went to sleep listening to that every night. And so I feel like, oh my God, yeah, that was definitely, that was like a formative experience. But I think it's really cool the way that you can, it's like, it feels to me almost like a cross between like reading when you like completely build something in your mind and like seeing something staged, right? It's like, oh, it's almost that special space where you can hear it and have that influence, but also there's like more left to the imagination that you could like internalize and experience in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the harder jobs when the actors come in for this as well, because usually when we think of voice acting, we think of maybe cartoons or anime or video games where visuals are a heavy part of the storyline. Emily, can you tell us what it's like to voice audio dramas and audiobooks? And is there anything you have to consider when doing roles like that?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I just want to say that I'm like loving listening to what everybody else is doing. I'm totally geeking out. I just love it. So like storytelling from an oral perspective is the oldest form of storytelling. Before we even had writing, right? Is we told each other stories through voice. So directly to answer your question, when you're performing, let's say, a book, right? You are the stage, right? You don't have the visuals, you don't have a physical space around you, and you are directly in that person's ear. You don't have a space to kind of mediate in between or to have to get through. You're just right there, right? So like, it really changes the way that it changes the performance quite a bit, in both in terms of it being more intimate and also being more expansive. And there's a lot of, this is getting pretty actory now, but like there's a lot of letting go that you have to do. I think when I come from having performed on stage more than in film, and on stage you can really like physically take up a lot of space because it's there and you need to project, right? But I think in an audio drama, there's a certain level of backing off and of letting the words and, yeah, well, it's really the words, tell the story. Sometimes you have the sound effects, right, to help you out. But really, I think it's all about the words. It's all about the writing. So I feel like writing is always important, but especially in an audio drama, I think that the writing is particularly at the core, the pillar of what's happening. So the voice is kind of just like, okay, are you doing a good job of delivering what the words are? You know, like you can get kind of caught up in like, oh, this person has an amazing voice, but it's like, well, okay, is the voice suitable for what's being performed? You know, that's what's more important, I think. But
yeah,
anyway.
No, I didn't even think about that, about how like everything about the acting process is very different. You know, people think like, oh, acting is just acting, but there's like, I didn't even think about like being right in someone's ear and like telling them a story versus on the stage and having a presence and everything like that. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes like in a book, you might be playing all of the characters, including the narrator, especially the narrator, right? So then that's also different. You don't get to focus on one or even three characters. It's all of them.
Mm-hmm.
This is a whole nother bag of tricks.
Roshan, did you want to say something, or are you just?
Yeah, I would love to jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
I love what Emily said about the whole thing of the void, right, that you're speaking to, and the voice that we provide through the acting it plays such an important role in filling up that space and creating the world. I think the thing that stand out to me when I'm directing for audio is I think the first thing is modulation is so important. As Emily pointed out, very often you're getting a lot of one person's voice, whether it's through like multiple characters, whether it's through like blocks of narration, which most audio dramas tend to have. I think what I've learned is that modulation and sustaining interest and energy is such an important thing. You know, sort of like when you're given a chunk of text with audio, and this is a challenge across all acting mediums. I'm not saying it's unique to audio necessarily, but it becomes so important that you have a beginning, a middle, and an end for all this stuff, and that you're able to sort of tell these arcs and tell these stories, and there's such attention to detail in sustaining that interest. And I think the second thing is because there's such onus on the voice to sort of create that space, I think there's this interesting challenge of like, if you're in a forest, if a character is running, if they were out of breath, there's almost a filmic level of immersion required. It's like, yeah, the audio can sort of, the SFX can create like this lush forest. It can give you everything, but you as a performer have to bring in, okay, I'm out of breath. I'm coming in with this. My leg is bleeding. What does me playing a bleeding leg sound like? Because the hardest thing to get right is to have your voice feel like it's part of the world. Even though like SFX libraries can build you that world easily, like the voice feeling like a part of it is such an interesting challenge. I think those two things together make audio just this interesting beast. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I feel like people just, again, with voice actors, like, oh, it's just dialogue, right? But no, it is, you know, where is the character? What are they doing? And why are they doing it? And that in itself creates the character, not just the dialogue. But I do want to ask, this is a question for everybody. Oh, wait, Matsu, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit because I actually like my main job because you may not believe this, but audio doesn't really pay that well unless you know what to do. We don't know what to do. But my main job is actually, it's getting better. That's true. And my main job is actually animation. I've been working in animation for about 7 years now. Yeah, 7 years. And I've been a fan of like cartoons since I was a very young kid. They're their primary inspiration for all my storytelling. And this comes into like a lot of issues with, let's say, hiring certain actors for voice acting roles is that it's always different. It's always going to be different, even if the fundamentals are the same. There's always a difference in how you want to perform a certain way. And I think it's closer with voice acting and podcasting than it is between acting and voice acting, because there is a different quality to how you have to imagine something. You need to bring in your imagination. If you don't commit, then if you don't commit with your whole face, like I mean, with everything you have, with understanding what the situation is, then it's just going to sound bad. It's like there's no way around it. It doesn't matter if you're like a award-winning actor who can act your heart out with your face. No one's going to see your face. You have to. There's like, fundamentally, it's going to sound good or bad, and people are going to pick up on that regardless of like how much experience you might have, which I have very little. Listen, I don't have any professional acting experience, but people like my podcast anyway, so something must be working. And I think everyone has a fundamental understanding as an audience, but also as a creator, of what sounds good and bad. And that's oversimplifying it, but it is also a good sense to have. And you should trust that sense. Like if it sounds good to you, then you should kind of trust it and see where that goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, very
I
important.
love all of that. I think just to piggyback onto all of this and just drive home the points that both of you just made. It's this, when you're on stage, you talk about something called stage presence, right? Which you can't really teach. You just kind of, you either gain it through time or you were blessed with it, right? I think the same thing is true of the voice. There's a presence, not in the voice timbre itself, but in the way that you can create these spaces, right? The way that you can commit and have the beginning, middle, and end, and have the space come alive, and the way that the body and the voice would come alive in that space without anything else to tell you that it's happening.
So I think it's safe to say that writers have a very important job to make sure that the actors can also do their jobs. Which makes me want to ask the question, what is a well-written Asian character? Oh, Matsi, would you like to start?
I actually would. And I think this is, I don't know if it's going to be controversial or not, but I do think that people who have to ask the question of what is a well-written Asian character might be missing the point slightly, just because I think, as with any character, you have to have an aim and a goal. And regardless of what, because Asians are not a unit, you know, like it may be simple enough to like put Asian into like a category, but somebody's gonna be mad at you. You know, like the point is that as long as you're not trying, like, you have to have a certain level of respect, and you have to have a certain level of don't be racist. But at the same time, if you're always worrying about what the right kind of character is, you're never gonna reach a genuine kind of character. And it's not gonna be for everybody, and you have to accept that, because if some people get mad at you, you have to look at the criticism and see if it applies, because sometimes it doesn't. There are a good example would be this happens all the time in like the Filipino space. Filipino American media is always lambasted by Filipinos who live in the Philippines, because it does not apply to Filipinos who live in the Philippines, and because of how active the social media presence is, the spaces kind of mix. But the truth is that there's a fundamental difference between the two spaces, and what might work for a Filipino American story will work for the Filipino American audience and will matter to a Filipino American audience, but will not for a Filipino who lives in the Philippines audience. So I think, to answer that question of what makes a good, well-written Asian character, you have to have a goal, and you have to achieve that goal. And if you feel as though you have achieved the goal of your character, and people have connected to it, that's successful. But you will always have people who will say it's wrong. And I don't know, like, there are a few rules you have to follow at certain points, like, again, don't be racist. Jesus.
The bar is very low, you guys.
Yeah, the bar is very low. But at the same time, it's like there is a validity between a character who, quote unquote, isn't very Asian at all, if they are based on something genuine and based on like a very specific like aspect of them. It doesn't have to be their Asianness that matters to them specifically. Or you can have a character who has that whole cultural background that they want to share and that they want to, portray, and also be successful in that. And some experiences are not universal, so it's just like, if you're worried about making a good Asian character, then you have to understand that a good Asian character will never please everybody. Yeah.
Can I just jump onto that?
Yes, of course.
Please.
That was so smart. I love that response. Yeah, that it's what is the saying, that in getting more detailed, you actually get more universal, right? Yeah, I agree. I think it's absolutely about building a good character, and to add on to what you were saying before about the context of an Asian American versus an Asian who's living in from whatever Asian country, right? That context really matters. And I think that you can't just put a color or a country on somebody and they're suddenly that, right? It's the context. Who are they, first and foremost? Are they, who are they as a character? And if you're going to add on elements of their cultural life, then you have to think about it from their perspective. I think that's usually what's lacking, is that it's typically a white perspective, and then you just kind of have like other colors smattered in, or somebody with different colored skin, but everybody's kind of the same, right? Or they don't have any depth because you haven't considered who they are from their perspective. It's not, what is it like to, even though we are living in the United States in a white world, white majority world, what is it like to not be white in that space, and not just from the anguished perspective, which there is, and that is valid, but that's not the only aspect, right? We all have lives. We're not just angry all the time, right? Like, yeah.
I feel like you both have just, so I don't know how much this will contribute to this conversation like this, but most of the time write very queer and very Asian work with predominantly Asian casts and queer.
Gay it up.
And I thought about that. I think a lot about that interplay, right? Like, of I'm a queer Korean person writing queer Korean stories, and that interplay between like what white institutions will want from me, and I sometimes do have this mindfuck moment of like, am I writing this in this way because I think it's what this white institution that's producing my work, or like whatever, just at large, like, is that from me, or is that me, like, what is that? Is that me like actively rejecting and trying to decolonize, in this way? Is it true to myself? So I feel like every time I sit down and write, I do have to like go through that a little bit. But I think the great thing about writing really queer, really Asian stuff with majority Asian casts is like, there's this space and this understanding where, as opposed to, and I think, writers, we're all gonna push that bar, like move diversity forward. Not diversity like actual diversity, right? Like not just like, let's just stick this Asian person in there. This person is smart, let's make this an Asian character, whatever. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but yeah, just when you're writing in this way, you can kind of focus on communal joy a little bit more. How people who are experiencing oppression or going through some sort of suffering because of the way people treat, like society, institutional racism, all that, treats marginalized identities. Like, there's this space to have this idea, like, it's not just like a bury your gays trope or something where you're queer, or that one drop of blood thing, where you're queer, so your life is full of suffering, and then you complete suicide and die. Like, that's like, it's
right,
a different vision for the future, and a different vision for yourself and your community. And like, I am this person, and I experience these hardships, but I also have this community, and this queer community, like, in the sense that we're all coming together, and maybe we're not from the same family of origin, or maybe we are, but that through the power of community, we can move beyond that, and start some fires and burn some things down. I don't know.
I know I'm like talking too much, but I just want to add like one more bit. I think like you mentioned, and I think here's the thing. you can always find a sensitivity reader. But that's very helpful. If you are unsure, always go for sensitivity readers. It's great. It gives people jobs. It makes you a little better, like you understand things better. But I think the main thing is having having a diverse, not in the sense that you think diversity is, but having a diverse set of views, having a diverse set, like allowing people to give their interpretations to you, if you are in a communal space, and then to understand that, oh, maybe that's actually the interpretation that is more genuine to this character. I think, like, for example, with characters of color being played by actors of color, getting their perspective is so key. Getting the perspective of people who fit into the background and the characters that you want to write or you want to include in a certain story is so key. It's, like, it's just a communal thing. It's not just a matter of you being like, I have to do this right. It's a matter of getting perspectives, and the wider your perspectives are, the more perspectives you hear, the more rich your writing becomes, I find. And it's always good to open yourself up, because you get stagnant, regardless of like whether it's about writing BIPOC characters or writing like queer characters. And I forgot to mention that Haina is also a queer horror podcast. But like getting like different views, and especially on the internet age, it's very easy now. You don't have to follow everybody's, like, you don't have to do everything everyone says, but you have to consider those views and see if it works for you, see if it works for the story, and just trust that, take it in good faith. Take everything in good faith, because if you just dismiss like different views, then you're just going to close yourself off. So yeah, that's like basically, if you want to write a good Asian character, don't assume there's always one right answer, but always be open to listening to all views, to not all people, to as many views as you can pertaining to this character, and let that shape your inspiration.
Wow, that was beautiful. Are you a writer or something, Muncie? Wow.
Dang, I don't know.
So we've mentioned the word diversity a couple times now. So I do want to ask, what is diversity looking like at this moment in the audio drama community? And Rashad, you haven't spoken for a while, so I am putting you on the spotlight.
There was no need to speak. I was in awe. I think that was terrific. I would say diversity in the audio drama space is very exciting, and probably one of the biggest draws as emerging creators is the fact that there's sort of a wild. I mean, people say Wild West, and then some people in the audio drama community cringe when they hear Wild West, because it's just become such a cliche. Like, yes, we get it. It's an emerging space. I think of the audio drama community right now as what it must have felt like to be an emerging indie comics creator in the 20th century, or how it must have felt like in sort of the dawn of a lot of industries, like the video game industry, where sort of people were trying stuff out. It isn't regarded yet as this sort of high stakes, tentpole, multi-billion dollar companies relying on such and such focus group tested thing. No, it's very genuine. There's so many people in the space. It really attracts marginalized creators, people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives, people with sort of full-time jobs who feel like they have something meaningful to say with audio drama productions that they work on in the evenings, which again, like very few forums allow for that sort of participation. And what that results in is this community where I think you see a lot of very surprising, very, very passion-driven projects that are explicitly, not even open to diverse voices. It almost feels like diverse voices and perspectives are the entire point of the indie audio fiction scene right now. And again, that's just so rare. That's so precious. Will it always be this way? I don't know. But I just feel so lucky that we're in this zone, because I don't see any other way that I, a Singaporean, would be invited to a panel like this if it weren't for our lovely medium, right? Like, it's so special.
I definitely do think since of the rise during the pandemic that audio dramas have been booming and everything like that, I definitely agree that productions are happening literally online. I'm going off the script, but I do want to ask, how has it been virtually to create like a complete story like online? I assume a lot of people recorded virtually or writing virtually, talking to each other virtually just to get the production done. What has that experience been like? Matsi, I know Hainai has been, was it the entire pandemic or did you start beforehand?
The entire pandemic, with my
Okay.
co-creator in the Philippines, exactly 12 hours difference.
Oh my God, time zones too.
Yeah. Mhm.
What
That's
was that
all we've
like?
known. That's what it's like.
But on the plus
It's
side, I
yes.
don't think it would have happened without this technology. Like you would have had to fly to the Philippines or they had to fly to Toronto to get this started. To be able to have internet access and to, you know, go on Discord or whatever Zoom that we have and literally be like, okay, guys, we're going to record today, is like amazing.
I want
Mhm.
to plus one more on the 12-hour difference thing. It's like Singapore and New York. It's tough. Your
Oh my
mornings and your
gosh.
night times become so precious.
Yeah, my brother lives in Singapore, so like, yeah.
But that means that
Yeah.
I'm sorry that you are familiar with this time zone hell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Hong Kong and Singapore to California is 15
Oh,
or
yeah.
16
Mhm.
hours.
Exactly.
I do want to
Yeah.
to shift us back slightly into the optimism that I know that Angela is hinting towards. It's incredible. Like I think one thing that I've gotten the chance to do recently is like we've been working on a slate of upcoming shows, and we have a writer who's based in South Africa, we have a writer who's based in New York, and we have another writer who's based in Singapore, and we've been able to coordinate all of that, through sort of shockingly efficient online sessions, and I think that the more we go along with the pandemic, like or post-pandemic reality of learning how to conduct creative, collaborative spaces, I think the more convinced I am personally that like there is a future in this. I think if we're talking about celebrating diverse voices, we've never been more empowered to give those people who, like we were saying, don't have the resources to fly or be flown out constantly,
Right.
the chance to participate and to participate actively. Like that's amazing. That's so cool.
Mhm. Exactly. And it's like there is a privilege. So I actually moved to Toronto in 2018. I lived in the Philippines my entire life, apart from those years. And there is an unspoken privilege of just being on this time zone that I am experiencing now. And the pandemic making it so that online work is more accessible and more doable, and even in many cases more profitable for a lot of people, which is like the bottom line for a lot. It works out. It's like people who never had these opportunities before, who would have had to move to this time zone, to these time zones, to be able to work in this space, are now able to just work in this space, where they are. And that accessibility is amazing, and especially for like audio and like all of the resources for audio drama, which is a fairly uh at its low resource in comparison to like making a film or making like all that. In terms of all that, it's the access is so widespread, anyone can do it. It's kind of like YouTube before YouTube became like a whole job. So that's kind of amazing.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good point with YouTube. It definitely like a whole new media is coming up, and we're all scrambling to get ahead. But it's fun, I swear, guys. Come join us. I think we have time for one last question. I'm just going to check real quick if the audience had any questions. If you guys do, now is the time to ask, so we
Yes,
can answer
and
them.
I do want to say one last thing. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Very
no, go
quickly. Listen, if you're afraid to join the audio space, listen, my podcast is Hainai, and we do lo-fi. And lo-fi was a trick that we played on everybody, because we're like, oh, it's on tapes, it's on phone calls, therefore the audio is bad. The real reason the audio is bad is because nobody had any audio equipment to record good audio with. And so what I would do is one person had a good mic and I would add effects on it. And one person was recording on their phone, I added no effects on it. And what you have is like same level of quality. And it's like, it's on
That's
purpose. It's
genius.
artistic.
Work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Like we stumbled our way into like how am I here? Like I don't know. I know 3 podcasts that I know. Like I knew like 1 podcast before I started, and then I know 3, and I have there's no barrier for entry except for like if you just happen to be good at telling a story and have a good story. Those are the barriers for entry. Everything else, like you don't have to be an expert in audio, everything. You just have to put it out into the void and people might really like it. So, stumble your way into success like we did.
Roshan?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think I agree with everything that Moses said. I think like there's a whole thing out there of like Audacity is free. iPhone mics and in general phone mics are so much more powerful than we give them credit for. And if you feel like you want to take a stab at an audio story, there's so much that you can do. But then here's the sort of because I feel like I've heard this advice a lot, and I've also heard the frustration of audio drama creators who are like, oh no, but like saying it's got a low barrier to entry disregards how difficult it is. And I want to preempt some of those difficulties for those of you who are listening who are feeling very inspired by us. I'm sorry if you are.
Here's why it sucks.
But here's what I think a lot of the difficulties we don't hear very much about are like the first off is attention is so difficult. There's such a glut of new podcasts coming out every single day, and it can feel really hard to get yourself noticed. And to that, I would say like if you're not on Twitter, consider it. There's a lot of audio drama people in that space, actively like talking about shows, promoting shows, and just yelling supportively about them. You want to look for people who are making shows that you like. You want to look for people who are doing reviews, which is coming back again for podcast fiction criticism. And I think in general, like there's a lot of stuff you can do to get your show out there, but understand that like it may feel really frustrating that like you've made something that you're proud of and people don't seem to be listening to it immediately. To which I also want to say that like Temujin came out, and for about 6 months, the downloads were kind of going like this. And it was just like it felt like nobody was listening to it. And then on the 6th month, we got a feature from Radio Drama Revival, and suddenly we peaked to more downloads than we got even when we like debuted. And that was just like word of mouth. So this is like sort of like the promise I want to make, which is that like you could feel really inspired, you could put out a podcast, and then you can feel really demoralized that like nobody's showing up. But like be prepared to work on, once you've made a good show, like letting word of mouth happen, talking about it, letting that happen, and then like eventually it will find an audience. But be prepared for it to take time and for it to be difficult.
I definitely think it's a thing about like being proud of your work, which is like, I know like it can be a little embarrassing to be like, oh, I made this, like, but you definitely have to be like, hey, I made this. Will you please look at it? And talk about it and get other people to also talk about it. And it's definitely like, because word of mouth definitely is, even though there is Twitter, even though there is social media, word of mouth is still, because if a friend told me like, hey, I really like this podcast, I'm going to be like, oh, well, we're friends, we probably have similar styles, I'll take a look to it. Versus like if someone on Twitter is just like, hey, this podcast is great, I'm like, okay, cool, random stranger on the internet.
Well, I mean, to which I just want to say, people want to signal boost good work. And people will want to support you, especially if you're from an underrepresented background. So don't be afraid of it. People want to help you. Sorry, Emily.
For sure. Yeah. No, I just want to add, so I actually produced a series that's not a podcast. It's called, our company's called Love Bites Originals, and the series is called Nice and Naughty. It's a romance short story series. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, one, to talk about the things that we're proud of and that we've made, right? But also, and it's set in Queens, and it's very diverse in all different kinds of ways. It's really fun. I made it because me and my business partner who's in Queens, we made it because we weren't seeing at the time very much diverse representation in romance, and especially not in the short form. But I'm bringing it up because it kind of occupies a space that we've not really explicitly talked about, and I want to explicitly talk about, which is it's between the space of books, playwriting, and film. It's between all of those things. And podcast is like the modern name for a serialized radio drama, right? Like that's all it is. So if you're a creator or interested, or your interest is piqued or whatever, as you're exploring and learning about what you might want to do in your format, definitely listen to books. Definitely, because that is the other half, right? If you're just coming from it from one perspective or the other, you might miss out on some opportunities to think about how you're presenting in a different format, right? It's a story, it's a serialized story, and sometimes that comes out in film or whatever. That I think I've said what I want to say.
Yeah, no, that was great. We do have a couple of questions from the audience I do want to go over before we're done with today. Someone asked, how do you pitch as a writer to an audio drama production company? I think you went over this slightly, but if anybody else has any thought. Oh, yeah, it's Roshan.
Hello, welcome to my special nightmare. Sorry, I've spent the past month or two literally gearing up for a slate of pitches, and in that time I've had the opportunity to speak to many remarkable people while I've been getting advice. And I would say, here's the first big thing, which is like, getting their attention is hard. Finding the people to talk to is hard. You have to be prepared to network, and by network I mean politely asking for advice, or like if people know people, and being prepared for a lot of no's, ghosting, or just sort of, and you just have to be patient. So that's the first thing, is like finding the people to pitch to is hard, and that's normal. The second thing is like when you have your pitch decks and like you're ready to sort of begin that conversation, be ready to talk about character. There's a huge premium placed in our industry on selling your character, because the character it's a mind you live in while you're listening to the show, and these companies know that. So if you can pitch them a really good character, then you're really pitching them a whole experience. So be prepared to be able to lead with that, and sort of do that in lieu of sort of pitching just a world or just a concept. So I've been told, at least, so take this as a grain of salt, that there's a glut of pitches around sort of high-minded stuff, and not enough about here's a human problem, here's their perspective, here's why that perspective is going to be interesting to a listener. And yeah, I mean, the third thing is like, I guess I touched on it slightly, but like have a good deck. Spend a while just sort of learning how to do this thing of like giving people the largest possible view of your story, and then funneling it down into like the micro details. And if you can do that really well, where like you earn their interest, or like, here's my story in like one slide, why you should care. Here's a little bit more info of my story, like the whole thing. And like in each step, you're sort of giving them a little bit more once you feel like you've got them listening. So yeah, those are the three things I've taken away.
Cool. Anybody else want to say anything, or?
Yeah, like thank you for the very professional, this is like literally you just did a TED talk in like in like 1 minute. That's a full TED talk, and you should listen to Roshan. I will just say, like Roshan said, like I think he already explained everything that needs to be said, but I do just want to add one thing, which is that I think when it comes to people who are creatives, there is a tendency to be, like you said, high-minded, a little bit, I guess, elitist is what I want to say. Because here's the thing, you should not be afraid of the mainstream, I will say that, or the what people would consider quote unquote low like low media or whatever. Like, you should not be afraid of the romances and the mindless action movies and the eroticas and all those things, because that's what people like, and you need to like your stuff. Like, and if you can explain it in the worst way, like, like lovingly worst, if you can explain your work in the worst way possible, then you understand your work and you get people to like it. And you need to have this enthusiasm and the ability to simplify it down to the base, to the bare bones, to the basics. I can say, oh, my podcast is a horror podcast with queer characters and a fully podcast, and that's part of it. That's part of the appeal. But I can also say like, well, listen, it's like you it's kind of like you have to explain it in a way. Here, I love writing fan fiction, I love reading fan fiction. You can explain it in like one go. It's very simple, but sometimes you can find the greatest writing in somebody's fan fiction, and that's but people have such a weird view, like have such a low view of it, and you have to understand that there's going to be like a huge audience for what some people might consider lowbrow, but that's what you're writing for. You're writing for your audience. You have to understand your audience. And if you think that, impressing like the most hoity-toity fancy, that's not your audience. Like, unless it is, in which case, like, sure. But you have to like you have to find your audience. And if your audience enjoys something, then you have to be prepared to enjoy it too. Like, don't put on airs, don't pretend you're better than you are. You have to have confidence in your work, but listen. But listen, have fun. Like, don't be afraid to be quote unquote lowbrow, because that's how people are going to listen to your work, that's how people are going to enjoy it, and you are going to be able to communicate such highly intelligent concepts in a package that is very um you know that people are ready to consume. Like, don't be afraid of that. Like, don't be afraid of reaching people. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
like,
wonderful.
yeah, just enjoy it.
And with that, I unfortunately do have to close today's panel. There were some questions we couldn't get to. I'm so sorry about that, you guys. But before we go, I do want to get everyone their socials. Emily, do you mind if you guys are okay with giving out your handles and stuff like that? Emily, what's the best way to reach you on social media?
I am at ZWooMan. On where am I? On Instagram, on Facebook. I am on Twitter. And the romance serial is Love Bites Originals.
Very cute. And Nina, what about you?
My Instagram is NI_EU_. I'm just like the first two letters, my first, middle, and last name. I'm also on Facebook, Nina Key. The work that's coming out for me, audio wise, I wrote a story called Blood, aka P, with Via Brooklyn, that should be coming out soon. And I also am working on another story with Girl Tales podcast. And yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, the first one was so cute. Matsi, where can we find you?
Ooh, it's so much easier to just find my name, Motsi Dapul, because like you can't, nobody. There's like one person with an OnlyFans who's named Motsi, but just add a Dapul to the end of that. Like, that's all. Like, literally, like, they're more famous than I am if you just count Motsi. Yeah, Motsi Dapul. You just search my name on like Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. You'll find me. But yeah, like, and you can find Hainai Podcast or Hainai Pod, HINAYPOD. It's everywhere you can find podcasts, and you can also find our socials that way. There, at least that one has all the same names. And I forgot to bring this up when it was brought up, but I'll just bring it up now. I also do indie comics, and this one is called the Pinoy Monster Boyfriend Anthology. You can't see it very well, but it's a queer monster romance anthology. I do, yeah, indie comics. You can find my indie comics on Ate Mozzarella, so ATE Mozzarella comics. You should be able to find them, or you can just search comics and my name, and it should come up. So yeah.
Awesome. And then Roshan?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter.
Question
my
mark?
handle
Or?
is-
It's like I told everyone to go on Twitter, but am I on Twitter?
my handle is at Roshan_Singh_S, because I didn't know what a hassle that would be when I was making the username. And yeah, you can listen to Temujin. We are recently distributed on Realm, which is fun. So you can check us out on their special app too. It's also available everywhere. And yeah, hopefully stuff coming out soon.
Yay. And my name is Angela Yee. You can find me at Girl Made a Jade. And my podcast is at Persephone Park on all the social media handles as well. Thank you guys so much for joining. This has been so great. I've learned so much just from talking to you guys, honestly. And I hope the audience has also learned a bunch as well. And now I can turn my AC back on. Thank you. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is awesome.